Good morning, welcome everybody to the second day of the Parma Summer School 2023 of Innovative Food Products. I introduce myself. My name is Veronica Lolli, researcher at the Department of Food and Drug of the University of Parma, and I will be the moderator of this session about innovation and science. The main topics of this morning session, will be innovation in sustainable food sources and processes, always in connection with safety aspects. So now it's time to introduce the first speaker of this morning session, Dr. Masami Takeuchi. She is a food safety officer at the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations, providing various food safety scientific advice to countries and to the Codex Alimentarius Commission. Her main responsibility lies on food safety risk assessment that deals with emerging issues and technologies such as biotechnologies, gene editing, and so on, and cross-cutting issues. So, Masami, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Veronica, for the very nice introduction. Good morning to everybody, probably good afternoon for some of you, good evening to some of you too. I am, as introduced, I am Masami Takeuchi. I am a national of Japan, but then working in Rome for decades, working on this food safety issue. And then today, this is a great opportunity for me to talk with the relatively younger generations, hopefully, about the work that I am doing, and then also the topic, so that you have some sort of ideas at what FAO is doing in this forum. Next slide, please. So first, that I just want to make you think that FAO has one single mandate, which is 2 words. So what do you think it is? Next slide. So it is food security, and FAO is a specialized agency of the United Nations that leads international efforts to defeat hunger. So this is the big goal and for FAO to achieve in the future. Next slide, please. But when we just say food security, lots of people may have different definitions of the food security. So I just want to introduce one definition of food security. Actually, there are quite few definitions of food security available by now. And most recent one is quite inclusive because we talk about sustainability and then environmental impact, climate change, economic equity, all kind of issues. So our definition became quite long and then quite good, comprehensive. But then I am just suggesting one definition, which is quite short, that is used in 1996, which is quite simple. And then I thought that it could be interesting for everybody to understand in a nutshell. I will read it out loud. The food security exists when all people at all times have physical, social, and economic access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food. So you can see those 3 pillars that I highlighted in yellow. So sufficient means like enough amount, and then also safety and nutrition. Those are the 3 technical pillars that I just wanted to highlight. And then I highlight safety because that's the area that I work on. And then as you can see, because of this inclusive definition of the food security, food safety becomes something that you really cannot ignore when we talk about food security, because without food safety, there would be no food security. Next slide, please. But this is the drought picture that I have. How can we talk about food safety and nutrition when there is no food? So this is a big question at FAO, that isn't it like priority to secure food first, and then we can talk about food safety and nutrition. Some people said like wanting to have a food safety and a nutrition when there is no food sounds like wanting some silk dress when there's nothing to wear. So for some people, that food safety and nutrition sound like a luxury, but then what I just want to tell you is it isn't. So next slide, please. What do you think that this is a photo that I took in Haiti, and what do you think that she is making? She's making a round shape material and then spread onto the floor, and then obviously like she's going to dry this one. Next slide, please. Lots of people thought that was some sort of plant pot or some sort of dish or something, but then actually she's making something that is non-food but then used as a food. So she's putting together some mud and then some water and then some oil that she can get access to. Sometimes there is some salt so that it does have some sort of taste. But then this is the reality that sometimes we have to see, that the food scarcity can really put people into the situation that they eat whatever that they can put into their stomach. And then that is not food security. That is just filling the stomach just to avoid the pain from the hunger. And then that is not what FAO wants to achieve. So even if it can be unsafe and then possibly contaminated, people eat when they are hungry, and then we have to stop that kind of situation. So therefore, food security does have to include food safety and nutrition, even from the beginning. Next slide, please. Now, what do you think this photo shows? You can see bunches of tomatoes, but then it doesn't seem like a harvesting field. What do you think it is? Next slide, please. Oops. Okay. This is a waste management field. Basically, tons of tomatoes are being wasted. Because of the food safety situation, there was a situation in the United States that there's a salmonella contamination detected in a tacos restaurant. And then at the time, it was a quite long time ago, and then they figured that it was a salmonella contamination in tomatoes. So they basically stopped importing tomatoes from the neighboring countries. And then this has a very sad ending because it was actually not tomato. The salmonella was coming from the green peppers. So this amount of tomatoes wasted for basically no reason at that time. So you can really see that this interaction between food waste and food safety, because if there is a food safety issues happen, that we will really have to waste lots of food. And then that goes around to this food security situation, because if you harvest something, if you have to waste it, then it will just contribute to the food insecurity situation. Next slide, please. So now that we are talking about various different factors and parameters coming in, for example, we do have a drastic population growth happening in the world. We do observe those extreme weathers coming in, and then most likely that is very sporadic, but then quite the lot of climate change impact as extreme weathers. And then we do observe like lots of livestock zoonosis, infections, and epidemic happening. And then also maybe pandemic, we just experienced one huge global pandemic, but then who can say that there will be none, following? So there might be something that is coming. And then also we see this geopolitical conflicts affecting food and feed trade. It's so immediate. And then we have the environmental impact of intensified agricultural practices. This is very difficult because we have more population coming to feed, but then if we intensify, there will be an impact, the adverse impact possibly to the environment, even for the human health. And then eventually that we may have this very, very critical situation that we may have this insufficient amount of food to feed all. Therefore, now that this summer school's theme of the innovation, we really think that FAO does think that innovation and transformation of the systems, the agri-food systems, are critical. And then one single thing that I really want to highlight here is that, that I understand that the most of us may be living in Europe, but then if you look at the global scheme, that the gaps between poor and rich may be widening in terms of this food security issue. So something really we have to think about when we have these comprehensive ideas of how the food system has to be set up and then transformed. Next slide, please. And then when we talk about innovations, I think lots of people would think about science and technology, but then FAO does look into other areas. Actually, the innovation becomes the true innovation when innovative approaches are used, right? I mean, basically that there could be some IT development or some sort of technological development. And then digitalization, like all kind of things sounds very sophisticated and very innovative, but then the idea that lies into this significant transformation in the society is when human us try to use it in a wise way, and then also to put the collaborative approach together to make the innovation possible. So this is the innovation, not only the single, scientific method or one single technique in the technology, but then we really have to think in a way that how we are going to apply it and how we are going to use it, because as you can just easily imagine that all kind of science and technology, if we misuse it, it could be a total disaster. So we have to think about the way that how we can apply those innovations. Next slide, please. And then many people think that those modern food techs may be outpacing us. So there are some sort of ideas that, okay, wait, we have to be cautious. We have to have this precautionary approach to think about what it exactly means, this technology means, and then this technique means, and then what if that we advance too far? Those kind of ideas exist. But here is the ideas from FAO that of course that the cautious approach is necessary, but then at the same time that we are not really talking about those innovations or technology or science is as one single solution to anything, basically. Those technology, innovation is just each of those the ideas and innovations are just tools, and then we have to think about all kind of different options. So and then given the need to secure enough safe nutritious food, we have to realize that technologies are necessary, and then under the pressure from the demographic, dietary, climate change, we need innovations. So what we can do is to make the efforts, the maximum efforts to understand how we can effectively and appropriately use those innovation and technology, and how those technologies should be regulated if there is some sort of concern. So this is how FAO try to capture the innovation. They are necessary, and then we have to try, and then we need to see how we can safely, appropriately use them. Next slide. For example, the whole genome sequencing is one of the technologies that we are really looking into. That this is such a technology that we think that food safety may benefit a lot from it. Next slide. And then also those new analytical methods in the laboratory technology to understand some chemicals or even microorganisms, that we do have to think about those new good novel analytical methods which can be speedy and then precise, and then those are the methodologies that we need to really proactively consider and then start using it in a food safety area. Next, please. Then digital transformation, that like we are not really saying that everything has to be online, but then what we are saying that if there is a potential to facilitate some international data exchange or information exchange, then this might be a way to go when we think about food safety related information. Please. And then this is a topic that I would like to talk today, these novel food production systems. I put the novel in the double quotation because sometimes that this has some sort of regulatory implications. For example, European Union does have a particular definition for novel food, but then I'm not talking about those regulatory defined novel food as a category, but I'm trying to say that something that has not been used in the conventional food production, then whatever that is, that we just think that this is new food production system, and then we probably need to look into it because we do have to assess if there is a potentials in anything that could be useful to address those issues that I have already discussed. Next, please. So, cell-based food. I have embedded the video, but then I don't plan to play it. I just give you the YouTube link here so that you will have opportunity to watch it. It's just a 1-minute video just explaining what it is in the animation. And like when I was doing this animation development, it was extremely difficult. Imagine that the cell-based food is something that uses a cell culturing technique to develop the muscle or fat tissues from the various different animal species. So I'm just likely saying various animal species, but then it can include something like poultry or fish or even kangaroo or like a turtle or those kind of species. We can actually develop some tissue culturing, and then this also can be applied to plants. And then production process, as you can imagine, if you make a chicken meat or salmon, like fillet, the process can be totally different. So we cannot really generalize the entire production process as one. So that's why that I provided this video to show that we can have a very high level understanding of the production process by putting them into 4 phases. So first one is cell sourcing. So you need to have a cell, the safe one. And then second phase is to produce from the cell. And then it means like a grow of the tissue. And then number 3 is harvesting the products. And then 4th phase is formulating or food processing so that it will shape in the final product. So those are the 4 phases that I want you to remember, because this is kind of similar stages for any kind of products like plant. You need a seed, you need to grow from the seed, you have to harvest, and you have to process, right? And then fish too. If you have egg, you have to have the growth, and then you harvest and you process. So it's kind of like a similar phase to the conventional food production, but then we can really explain in the way of those 4 phases. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. Thank you. So this is coming from the 2020 study that what kind of development is happening in terms of the commodity. So as you can see that there are lots of different commodities, and then if we start including the precision fermentation using the cell culturing technique, that the potential is wider, because we can talk about some sort of milk, dairy products and eggs and things like that. So potential, in terms of the technological potential, is there. Next slide, please. And then also that this production process that you can see that this is the figure that we can use as a stem cell use of the cell culturing, but then that is not only the option. We can use the iPS cells, and then also a different system with the cell line companies can make the pre-made cell lines, customizable cell lines, so that cell-based food company can use that one to multiply. So basically that we have various different production process, even from the cell sourcing point of view. Next slide. And then once the cell lines are prepared, the bioreactor will be used to have a growth. And then sometimes, but not all the time, that people use scaffolding, and then so that it will be the cell, it will grow into certain format and a certain shape. But then sometimes, like some developers do not use scaffolding. So even just taking the scaffolding examples, that we can have a wide variety of products. And sometimes the developer uses just stacking of the fibrin so that it will be holding the structure of the kind of meat kind of structure. So in the end, that's how the harvesting happens, and then in the end that the developers and company make the final product into the shape that we can be feeling familiar to. Next slide, please. So I have been using the terminology of cell-based food, but then it is difficult to call this type of product what it is, because what would you call it? There are lots of the modifier that say, like cultured meat, cultivated meat, lab-grown meat, clean meat, fake meat, all kind of names that you can name it. But then that what FAO found is that some of them can have some sort of positive or negative connotation together. For example, clean meat sounds like positive meat, and then also fake meat sounds negative, basically. So FAO wanted to avoid using any kind of value judgment is included in the nomenclature, because it was we didn't want to mislead anybody. We wanted to use something very neutral. And then also there could be a confusion, for example, cultured terminology, because if we use the cultured denominator for fish, for example, salmon, then if we say cultured salmon, it does sound like the aquacultured salmon. So it was very difficult for some people to think about, like, how we can really distinguish this type of products from the conventionally produced products. So eventually that we came up with this idea of cell-based, but then I just warn you that the cell-based term is not really scientific. Any term is really not scientific in the end, because I'm just talking about cell-based term. When you really think about it, anything that has cells can be called cell-based. So it doesn't automatically distinguish this type of products just by saying cell-based food. But then good news here is that nobody in the past has ever called anything cell-based. So if we start calling something cell-based, I would think that the consumers would think that this is something new. So this is important for us to have this understanding from the general public. And then also the difficult part is about the use of the commodity name. For example, if we use meat or salmon, then there are some sort of concerns. For example, some governments told us that they have meat regulations, for example. And then if we start calling this type of product meat, then they may have to apply these meat regulations to this type of products, and then it may not or may be relevant. So basically that we wanted to avoid using the commodity names so that there will be no confusion about it. So that's why that we came up with the word cell-based food. And then this is the working terminology for FAO and WHO, but then at the same time, we are calling it working terminology because we still want to be open about this situation, because in the end, you can imagine that there are more than 6,500 languages exist in the world. And then, for example, the term cultured is very difficult to translate in, for example, Portuguese. My Brazilian colleagues told me that it doesn't make sense if somebody say cultured meat in the Portuguese context. So we thought that it would be actually better that the regulators or somebody who decides the nomenclature to think about the local context, also the language implications, so that the first priority is to avoid the misunderstanding and misleading the consumers by calling something with the name that could be confusing. So FAO WHO decided to suggest that we do use a working terminology of cell-based food. If it works for your context, great, but if it doesn't, please study and then use the term that makes the most sense to you. So this is the current situation. And then also the cellular agriculture is another term that lots of people use to explain about the production process of this particular products. But then I think particularly Latin language culture told me that agriculture may mainly indicate crop production. It's very interesting. I'm not coming from that language culture, so I don't really understand. But then, so it doesn't sound super great to talk about meat. So, okay, so it's very interesting that just the nomenclature alone, it's very difficult to come up with certain conclusion. Next slide, please. Yeah, so we had a terminology discussion among the experts. So we just didn't just pick the word, but then we had a long discussion to come up with the conclusion. Next, please. And then I would say this is no longer futuristic products because I talk to those developers, and then I see those products. I have eaten some of them, and then they are quite established. But then the only thing that I would say is that they are still producing in the pilot plants. It's not a laboratory anymore, it's a food processing plant, but then it is no longer really like an experimental stage. But then one thing that I would say is that it is not in the large scale production facility yet. There are quite a few plants have been developed now, so it may change anytime soon. But then at this moment, I would say that these are the products that are close to their commercial quality. But then, but then price is still high, and then the circulation in the market is not yet happening, and then large scale production is not yet there. But then I wouldn't say this is something futuristic. I would say it's there. Next slide. And then, I mean, I'm sure that our audience is food safety minded person. Like I said, if it isn't safe, it isn't food. So safety comes first. And then I wouldn't think that food safety is a barrier. I think that once that the food safety issue is clear, then I think people can really talk about the real important issues, like one, is it really sustainable? Is it really like impacting less on the environment? How about animal welfare issue? How about food security issues? You know, like price, cost, coexistence with the conventional livestock production, those kind of super important issues that we can really talk. But then if we get stuck with the safety concerns, we cannot move to the very important discussion. So that's why that I think that the food safety should come first. Next. And then FAO and WHO published this milestone publication. I put the QR code there, so hopefully that you'll be able to download. It's a big document, 150 pages, but then we have all the information in it. Next slide. And then the main core topic in this publication is this results of the expert consultation on food safety hazard identification. Just note that this is only the first step of the 4 steps of the formal risk assessment. And in a nutshell, the conclusion, next slide, is I prepared 2 slides. Yeah, so the previous one probably. No, previous 2 before, or more. Yeah, so as I explained, that the 4 phases that we try to identify the hazards, but then the first square that we try to have something that we already know in the conventional production process, but then among them that we try to understand what could be potentially new. Next slide. As a conclusion, that we said that many hazards are already well known, and then they do exist in the conventionally produced food. And then various control measures existing at this moment, including good practices and HACCP, could be applicable to ensure food safety for the cell-based food production. But then focus should be those novelty. So what is new, what is unique, what's not being used in the food production? So those are the things that experts have agreed to look after. Next slide. And then the very important question, a very important point is communication. So like I said, nomenclature issue sounds like a social issue, but then it is not. It is an important part of the communication because we have to call it something. And then it is a regulatory necessity because regulators have to label them. So how do we call them? And then we have to question ourselves that do consumers know exactly what they are? If not, there is action necessary. We have to start educating, informing our consumers. And then, do consumers expect any food items on the market should be 100% safe? Sadly, they do. So, but then we are scientists, and then we know that there is not possible to have 100% safety for anything. But then we have to really consider this consistency that it applies to the cell-based food too. So nothing is like given 100% safe. So we make things safe. And then while specialists would clearly differentiate the concept of hazard and risk, that I don't think that the consumers would do the same. So we really have to think about how to communicate with the consumers about hazards that we have identified to ensure that it doesn't go into the high risk item. Next slide, please. And it's exactly the same thing that I want to apply to the precision fermentation. FAO is doing all the same thing about terminology, regulatory frameworks, what could be the hazard identification, what could be the good output coming out of this safety assurance of the precision fermentation. Next, please. Yes, and then 3 key take-home message. Recognize that technology has a huge potential, but then as I am working at the global level, equal accessibility is key, and then food safety, the safety comes first. So that's all from my talk. Thank you very much.